There's a line I heard from something I watched a while back that I wrote down, and it really stuck with me. And it's not a line it's really profound in itself, but it felt very real to me, and I remembered that recently, and it felt like a living and active kind of statement rather than just a potential statement. And I was able to track it down again, and it really blessed me even more, especially with everything that's going on. And so it came from a leader of this small town. It was a small community that was they were facing a great threat that just seemed impossible to beat. That they just seems like even when they defeated a part of it, that there was another somewhere else that they didn't know about, and it just seemed like there was no way. But this opposition, it threatened their whole way of life and everything they know. And there were other communities that they needed their help, and for a long time they just they stuck in what they knew, and then they kept seeing that force just threaten all that's good, everything that they'd fought for to get to where they were that day. And the leader was so excited. They were facing great loss, and they had great loss like they did, but it was before the battle. You couldn't even tell that he was going into a great battle of great loss, and he was so excited. And he was talking to this woman who had she'd had a very hard life. She'd suffered great loss and lost her own child, but she was a strong woman. She was a strong person, and she's just kind of watching him as he's just ready to go fearless into this, and he said, "I'm ready to become what I must." And she said, "To become?" She was, "To become." And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Were you always as strong? Were you always as strong, or did you one day decide to be who you are now?" And she said, "Yeah, I decided." She said, "Life decided some things too," which was interesting because I didn't remember that part, but I wrote down the line. He said, "If someone asks you to be the hero, be the hero." And I wrote, circumstances may ask themselves, because that's the way it never is that simple where someone says, "Be the hero." But if someone asks you to be the hero, then be the hero. It felt so real to me in that moment because it didn't feel like a potential statement waiting for somebody to ask. It felt, even back then when I heard it, I go, yeah, that's right. It could be any time. It could be again, and it could be over and over again. And it just felt like, yeah, it's never too late, you know? We have these preconceptions of a hero, and that's just part of it. Just like we can't help but describe things about our Heavenly Father by our own earthly father, which I had a great father, so that really gave me a step up, I feel like, in a lot of ways. We do that. We try to make sense of things by our own perceptions, our own life, our own experiences. And so it comes down to a lot, but we have how they even may look when we think of like a hero. What's a hero look like? What do they even look like? And we've got examples, like David, when he was still a shepherd boy. I mean, the great prophet Samuel didn't even know. I know he wasn't in the house, but he went to Eliab first. And he said, "This has got to be him. He's the tallest and strongest." And he's like, God said, "Don't judge. Don't look like that. That's not how everybody sees. It's not how man sees things. It's how I do." So he goes through, of course, every other son. And then finally, the little tiny shepherd boy that nobody thought about. His father couldn't even think. There was no way. So why call him in, keep him out with the sheep? But it's always about the heart, of course. And I think about when Goliath was there, everybody was too afraid to go up to Goliath. And I think about Eliab was up there. He was angry with David for coming up and asking that question. He said, I know the pride and insolence in your heart. That's what's great too, is that people will think that somebody that's humble and has faith, that they're prideful. Like the spies. I mean, they thought the two spies, Joshua and Caleb, they must have thought they were prideful. What do you think in these days? These people were impossible to beat. But they were humble and they trusted in their Lord against all odds. But there are, of course, there's so many shadows of heavenly realities on this earth that we can. So when we see heroes, the key element of any true hero is self-sacrifice. And I think about Stacia writing in that letter when she went to the Titanic Museum, and it's how many people are dead because they gave up their spot so that a child could go, or children, or a family, or a wife, or a woman, or a man, or who, just to say, I'm gonna give up my life for this person because it means they can go on. And self-sacrifice really comes down to humility. So we can have these appearances of a hero, how they look, and I think about Job and how much a hero he has been through the centuries. He didn't look like a hero to them. They thought he was. And he was a well-established member. He was wise. People knew who he was when he came into the marketplaces, but he looked the opposite of a hero. They had no idea, but he was. And it was because of his prayers that God said, I'm going to have Job pray for you, for those three friends that through that whole trial, they might have just well been ridiculing him just straightforward through all of his trials. So if you would turn to Romans 12. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice. Right before our last Sabbath, instead of a sermon, Pastor was moved to have a testimony service, and he was moved right before to say that, some of you have been chosen to be a living sacrifice. You just can't stress how much that's the greatest honor that we can have, is to be chosen to be a living sacrifice. Especially not knowing any circumstances at all and not knowing what anything means. The sacrifices don't know they're being chosen for that. They don't know why. They don't know why. Think about it just as the animal going up on the altar. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what it all means. But that God would choose you and put you in a situation to suffer for his name's sake, but for greater things than we can ever know, and that he would put you in that situation not knowing anything and trust you to go through it. So we choose to be a living sacrifice, of course, but sometimes he places you in there where you don't know anything, and it's a good thing. It's so good. So the cost of heroism, true pure heroism, the pure heroes we've called to be, is self, not just our personalities and not just who we are, the things we love about each other, the things that God made us to be, are these unique children, but self, the fallen self, the ego. There was a couple things I wanted to look at with Jesus in his life, and I'm just going to look at one that I know really strikes to everybody's hearts. In Luke 22. Verse 39. And he came out and proceeded, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples also followed him. When he arrived at the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and began to pray, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." In the last 2 months, I've noticed a byproduct is that a lot of times when I'm praying about something specific, I'm saying, "If you're willing," and meaning it, not just saying it, because I know I'm supposed to. Because I'm so tired of asking the wrong thing. I'd rather ask the wrong thing but mean it and be just wrong, rather than just want my way. Lord, heal me. If you're willing, heal me. Like the lepers that came to him, the people, if you're willing, I want to be healed. Now an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. And being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down upon the ground. When he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping from sorrow, and said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not enter into temptation." While he was still speaking, behold, a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was preceding them, and he approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" The wounds of a friend are deeper than anything else. Yeah, he knew what Judas, he knew his heart wasn't right the whole time. He knew he was going to betray him, but it didn't change anything. We've heard this so many times. He washed his feet like the others, but he was right there with him the whole time. Didn't change anything. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. As far as the way Jesus operated, I was going to look in Mark 1 because it's just with Mark. It's a short, so there's action. It's a nice section, but it's just that he just never stops at any cost, at any self-sacrifice. It's just he's there in the synagogue, and then they leave and they go to Peter's, and then he's there, and then the whole town shows up at night, and he's healing them, he's casting out demons, he goes all night, and then he goes out to pray because I got to get time with my Father, and he goes out to pray, and even when he's out there in the early morning when it's still dark, then the disciples show up looking for him, and then he just keeps moving, he just never stops, he's just relentless. And I was talking about we have our own preconceptions of heroic acts and heroism, and obviously me too. I have my own. Everyone's different. I know that it's easier for me to think about maybe a heroic act in the template way that we do. It seems easier for me to buffet my body in a moment of show of physical prowess, just to press my flesh up against the wall, so to speak, and just hold it down and endure the physical pain in a moment for someone to be spared or protected or something. Somebody jumping in front of a bullet or whatever. I don't know. Think of whatever, something simple like that. That's quick and easy, though. We don't know what the Lord's going to ask us. We don't know what the Lord's going to ask us to suffer for each other, for strangers, for the world. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but it was a couple years ago. I never wrote it down in my journal. I started it was October 28th, 2017. It was just this night. It was very strange too, because we had the guys came over and we had a particularly late night, but it was great. We were having fun, laughs, all that, and it's just like it's almost like something earlier in the day that came up during Bible study. It's like I had just tabled it, and I go like, "Oh, I need to get back into that." But we were just talking about something I've thought of plenty of times, but we were talking about the effects of our actions and our deeds in this world, and what we do is a matter of life and death for who knows how many. And we're just like, I mean, what number can you ascribe to that? Who knows? It could be countless. There's no way to know. I'm just thinking, like, I can't be okay with that. So it's like I just struggled and I couldn't get to sleep until like just like 5 in the morning or 6, I don't know. And I just struggled, and I'd been asking for it for so long. I said, Lord, I just want to just feel a little bit of that pain, that love that you have for them, because it's the only way I'm going to understand it. I can't just choose to feel like that. I said, and I got it, and I shrunk back from that because it's hard. It's hard to feel that He loves them so much. I want to read something from John 15. Verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you would go and bear fruit, and that your fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name He may give to you. This I command you, that you love one another. If the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this the world hates you. We've been called to be the punching bags of the world so that they might know Him. Nothing changes. They beat us, they stone us. They belittle us. Who knows? Somebody you know may have been belittling you for years or treated you with scorn, and maybe one day the switch is flicked just like it was with me, just in a moment. You don't need to turn there, but I'm just going to read something from Romans 8 too. He who searches the heart knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because He intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. For those whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, so that He would be the firstborn among many brethren. And these whom He predestined, He also called. And these whom He called, He also justified. And these whom He justified, He also glorified. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who is against us? That's a hard image to conform to. We have to stay on the fire. It stays as a solid ingot until it gets hot enough, and then it melts. And then the dross can be picked off. We can't move ourselves off from it. You've all been appointed for this. You've all been appointed to suffer. And I'm telling you, we're all called to be heroes. We are heroes. He's made us that. We're ambassadors of Christ. We're lights of the world. There's no ifs or thens. There's no later. It is now. Everyone. Don't think little of yourself. I can't read minds. Every single one. Maybe I've ministered to you this feast. I don't know. Maybe before. That's a miracle. Okay? It's a miracle that any good comes out of me at all. I say that with complete sincerity because I know myself better than anyone here. I want to read one last thing, a couple things from 2 Corinthians because we can't help but see the mess we are. Jesus doesn't see it, but we see the mess we are. And we need to have confidence, step in our role. Have confidence because God's in control. He always has been. He's still in control. God's been moving that. He's been creating a love for one another that's undeniable. So there's no dross in the mixture. Everything's pure. It's a pure people. It's pure heroes. He is taking out all the dross. And of course, he's starting with each other. Because we're the bride. We're one unit. We cannot move how we need to move if a joint's out of place, if anything's broken, if there's a fracture, if there's a splint on it, if there's an illness. We move together. We move as one. So we love each other. And we rest in each other. And then we move out. And we take the carriage with us. Just like we read. He just read it earlier. We take the carriage with us. We go out pure and whole and fearless, full of faith, trusting in the Lord, no matter what. It doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter what anybody does to us. We're a bunch of shattered lamps. The light of the Lord shines the brightest in our brokenness. 2 Corinthians 3, verse 17. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord, the Spirit. Move ahead in chapter 4, verse 7. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, so that the surpassing greatness of the power will be of God and not from ourselves. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not despairing, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying about in the body the dying of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our body. For we who live are constantly being delivered over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death works in us, but life in you. We can have confidence no matter what happens, no matter how you look. Just have confidence. We're just called, and humility is just such a great thing. We've seen people come up here and be honest about things. Matt, Sandy, we don't have to know everything. Not everything has to make sense. But humility just cannot be beaten. Just like the song we see, just have confidence because victory is already ours. It's finished. It's done. The blood of Jesus has overcome. We're just waiting to get to the finish line.